Festival organizers at Woodstock tried everything they could to keep Carlos Santana away from the stage on August 16, 1969, dismissing the unknown San Francisco band as unworthy of their legendary festival. But when 40,000 people refused to accept that decision and chanted until Santana was allowed to perform, what followed wasn't just one of the most iconic performances in rock history. It was a moment that left those same organizers wishing they had never tried to silence the voice that would define Woodstock's legacy. The resistance to Santana had started weeks before the festival even began. When Bill Graham, the legendary promoter, recommended the band for Woodstock's lineup, several festival executives questioned the decision. Santana was a relatively unknown group from San Francisco's club scene, and in the summer of 1969, festival slots were precious commodities reserved for established acts that could guarantee ticket sales. There were people on the organizing committee who had never heard of Santana and didn't understand why we were giving stage time to some unknown Latin rock band, revealed John Morris, the festival's stage coordinator, years later. They kept asking, why not book another folk act or a bigger name rock band instead? The skepticism wasn't just about name recognition. Some organizers worried that Santana's Latin-influenced sound wouldn't resonate with what they perceived as Woodstock's predominantly white, middle-class audience. It was a short-sighted view that failed to recognize the cultural revolution happening in American music, but it reflected the industry's limited understanding of the changing musical landscape. Michael Lang, Woodstock's primary promoter, had supported including Santana based on Bill Graham's passionate recommendation and his own instinct that the festival needed to represent the full spectrum of American musical innovation. But as the festival date approached and logistical pressures mounted, his support was increasingly challenged by other executives who saw Santana as an unnecessary risk. The morning of August 16th, those tensions came to a head when the festival began running severely behind schedule. By noon, they were already 3 hours late, and several major acts, scheduled for later in the day, were pressuring organizers to cut lesser-known performers to make room for the headliners. That's when some people started saying we should just cancel Santana's slot entirely. Morris admitted, they argued that nobody would notice if an unknown band didn't play, but they would definitely notice if Jimi Hendrix or The Who got cut short. Carlos and his bandmates had no idea about these backstage machinations. They had driven cross-country from California, believing they had a confirmed slot at 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. When that time came and went with no word from organizers, they began to sense something was wrong. We kept asking when we were supposed to go on, and we kept getting vague answers, recalled Greg Rowley, Santana's keyboard player. People would say, soon, just wait a little longer, but nobody could give us a straight answer about what was happening. By 4 p.m., the band learned the truth when an apologetic roadie finally explained the situation. Festival executives had decided to temporarily postpone Santana's performance with no guarantee that they would play at all. They told us that bigger names needed the stage time more than we did. Bassist David Brown remembered. It was devastating. We had driven 3,000 miles to play Woodstock, and they were treating us like we didn't matter. But while organizers were making these decisions in production trailers behind the stage, something entirely different was happening in the crowd. Word had spread among the 40,000 people that Santana was at the festival and scheduled to perform. And many had come specifically to hear this innovative band they'd heard about from friends in San Francisco. As the afternoon wore on, and Santana failed to appear, sections of the crowd began asking security guards and roadies when the band would play. These weren't casual inquiries. These were people who had traveled long distances specifically to hear Santana's unique fusion of Latin rhythms and rock energy. By 5 p.m., we were getting constant questions about when Santana would go on, said festival security coordinator Tom Rounds. People weren't just asking, they were demanding to know why the band wasn't playing. That's when the chanting began. It started with maybe 50 Bay Area residents near the front of the stage who knew Santana's music and had been waiting all afternoon to hear them. They began a rhythmic chant of Santana, Santana, that gradually spread throughout the massive crowd. It was unlike anything I had ever seen at a concert, remembered photographer Henry Diltz, who was documenting the festival. The chant started in one small section and just kept growing, like a wave moving through the entire field. Within an hour, the chanting had grown so loud that it was drowning out the acts trying to perform on stage. Festival organizers, safely isolated in their production area, initially tried to ignore what they dismissed as crowd noise. But by 6 p.m., the sound had become impossible to overlook. We could hear it clearly, even inside our trailers, Morris recalled. It wasn't just noise, it was 40,000 people rhythmically demanding one specific band. I had never experienced anything like it in 20 years of concert production. The situation reached a crisis point when Country Joe McDonald, who was performing on stage, stopped his set to address the chanting directly. Instead of being annoyed by the interruption, he encouraged the crowd, saying, "I can see you want Santana, and I want to see them too. Let's keep the energy going until they bring them out." This moment of artist solidarity with the crowd's demands was captured on film and became one of the most powerful examples of musical democracy in concert history. McDonald was essentially using his platform to support the people's will against the organizers' decisions. Backstage, panic was setting in among festival executives. They were facing a choice between continuing to resist the crowd's demands and risking a full-scale revolt, or giving in and admitting that their judgment had been wrong. The chanting went on for nearly 2 hours and just kept getting louder, Morris said. By 7 p.m., we realized we had a real problem. The crowd wasn't going to give up, and other acts were having trouble performing because of the noise. Michael Lang, who had originally supported Santana's inclusion, made the decision that would change music history. He overruled the other executives and told the band they were going on stage immediately, regardless of the schedule. Michael came to us and said, "The people want you, and when 40,000 people want something this badly, they're going to get it," Carlos remembered. He looked exhausted and a little scared, but he was doing the right thing. When Carlos walked onto the Woodstock stage at 7:15 p.m., he was greeted by the loudest crowd reaction of the entire festival. The 40,000 people who had chanted for 2 hours exploded into cheers that seemed to shake the ground itself. What happened next was nothing short of magical. Santana launched into Evil Ways with an intensity that seemed to channel all the collective energy the crowd had been building during their 2-hour campaign. The performance was electric from the first note, with Carlos's guitar speaking directly to the people who had demanded his presence. The crowd was so connected to the music that they were anticipating solos before Carlos even started playing them. Drummer Michael Shreve recalled, "It was like they were musically bonded to us in a way that went beyond normal audience response." The highlight was Soul Sacrifice, the 11-minute instrumental that showcased the full range of Santana's revolutionary sound. As Carlos built his guitar solo to its climactic peak, the crowd seemed to rise with him, creating a feedback loop of energy that was visible and audible to everyone present. During Soul Sacrifice, it felt like the whole festival was levitating, said photographer Baron Woolman. Carlos wasn't just playing for the crowd, he was playing with them. They had demanded this moment, and now they were living it together. The performance lasted nearly an hour, and when it ended, the crowd's response was unlike anything Woodstock had seen. The applause went on for 10 minutes, with periodic returns of the Carlos Santana chant that had made the performance possible. But the most dramatic change was happening backstage among the very organizers who had tried to keep Santana away from the stage. The moment Carlos started playing, everyone backstage just stopped what they were doing and listened, Morris recalled. Within the first few minutes, it was obvious that we were witnessing something extraordinary. By the end of Soul Sacrifice, we all knew we had almost made the biggest mistake in festival history. The executives who had argued against Santana's inclusion were stunned into silence. They had expected, at best, a competent performance from an unknown band. Instead, they were witnessing what many would later call the most innovative and culturally significant set of the entire festival. I remember standing next to one of the executives who had been most vocal about cutting Santana from the lineup. Morris said, after about 20 minutes of the performance, he turned to me and said, "My God, what have we done? We almost kept this away from people." The regret was immediate and profound. As Santana's performance reached its climactic peak, festival organizers realized they had nearly deprived the world of one of rock music's most important moments due to their own narrow-minded assumptions about what audiences wanted to hear. "We had judged them based on name recognition instead of artistic merit," admitted festival coordinator Chip Monk years later. "We almost let our own prejudices and commercial concerns override what turned out to be pure musical genius." The impact extended far beyond that single performance. Footage of Santana's crowd-demanded set became one of the most iconic sequences in the Woodstock documentary, introducing their revolutionary sound to millions of viewers worldwide. Within months, the unknown band that organizers had tried to silence had become global superstars. More painfully for the organizers, the story of how they had resisted Santana's performance became part of Woodstock legend, but not in a way that reflected well on their judgment. Music historians would write about the festival executives who nearly prevented one of rock's most important performances due to their lack of vision. "That became the most embarrassing chapter in my entire career," Morris reflected decades later. "We had the chance to support groundbreaking music, and instead we almost silenced it because we couldn't see past our own limited expectations." The lesson was so powerful that it fundamentally changed how major festivals approached artist selection. The Santana incident became a cautionary tale, taught in music business courses, an example of how industry executives could be completely wrong about artistic merit and audience desire. Michael Lang, who had ultimately made the right decision by allowing the performance, later said that the Santana controversy taught him never to underestimate an audience's sophistication or hunger for innovation. "The crowd proved that they understood something about music that some of us in the industry had missed," Lang reflected. "They heard about this band creating something new and different, and they demanded the right to experience it. They were smarter than we were." For Carlos and his bandmates, learning about the behind-the-scenes resistance to their performance added an extra layer of meaning to their Woodstock triumph. They hadn't just succeeded as musicians. They had vindicated the wisdom of the people who had believed in them against industry skepticism. "Knowing that some executives had tried to keep us off that stage made the crowd support even more meaningful," Carlos said years later. "The people understood our music before the industry did. They fought for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves." The festival organizers' regret became even more acute as Santana's post-Woodstock success unfolded. The band's debut album, released a year later, reached number 4 on the Billboard charts. Their second album, Abraxas, became one of the best-selling albums of all time. Carlos Santana would go on to win multiple Grammy Awards and be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. "Every time I heard another Santana hit on the radio, I was reminded of how close we came to preventing their breakthrough," Morris admitted. "We almost kept one of the greatest guitarists in history away from the stage that made him famous." The regret wasn't just professional, it was personal. The organizers who had opposed Santana realized they had let their own biases and commercial calculations blind them to authentic artistry. They had prioritized name recognition over musical innovation, and they had nearly deprived the world of a transformative cultural moment. "I learned that day that the music business isn't just about business," Monk said. "It's about recognizing and nurturing art that can change people's lives. We almost failed at the most important part of our job." Today, the story of how Woodstock organizers tried to keep Santana away from the stage serves as one of the most powerful examples of how wrong industry experts can be about artistic merit. It demonstrates that audiences often have better instincts about groundbreaking music than the executives who control access to platforms. But perhaps most importantly, it shows the power of collective action in supporting authentic artistry. The 40,000 people who chanted Carlos Santana onto that stage didn't just get to hear the music they wanted. They preserved a moment of cultural history that might otherwise have been lost to corporate short-sightedness. The organizers who tried to silence Santana learned that music belongs to the people who love it, not just the people who control it. And their regret became a lasting reminder that when audiences unite behind authentic artistic expression, they can override any authority and create moments that define cultural history. The chanting that forced Santana onto the Woodstock stage didn't just create a legendary performance, it created a lesson that the music industry is still learning today. Sometimes the crowd knows better than the experts, and sometimes the most important voices are the ones that authority tries hardest to silence.